There's only one guy. One down, one to go.
We are pad 39B with the STS-115 crew, so we will pass the mic to our commander, Brent Jett, and he'll make some comments, introduce the crew, and then we'll take some questions. Brent?
Good morning. Thanks for coming out today. It's good to see you all again. Before we take your questions, just quickly point out the crew to you. I think you know who most of them are. To my immediate left is Mission Specialist number 4, Steve McLean from the Canadian Space Agency. To Steve's left is our shuttle pilot, Chris Ferguson from the United States Navy. Next is Chris, Mission Specialist number 2, Dan Burbank from the Coast Guard. Next to Dan is Heidi Piper, and Heidi's from the Navy. And next to Heidi is Mission Specialist number 1, Joe Tanner, our lead spacewalker. Before we take your questions, just to let you know, our training's been going extremely smoothly here for the past day and a half, and we're looking forward to a good practice countdown tomorrow. So with that, we're happy to take your questions.
Pat Duggins, WMFE for Brent Jett. This may have come out in earlier briefings, and I apologize if it's already been gone over before, but STS-115 took a low-Q ascent on their mission, but since you're carrying so much weight on this one, number one, do you have the low-Q option, and if not, does that increase concerns as far as stress on the tank and possible foam loss?
That's a good question, and I think part of that we should probably leave to the pre-flight briefing, which is going to occur on Friday. You'll get detailed assessments on the engineering side of it. I mean, I've seen some of the engineering studies, but they should probably speak to you directly and let you know the exact margins that they're looking at between low Q and high Q. As far as we're concerned, it's not an issue. If you look at the difference between a low Q ascent and high Q, for us, the main differences are when we pick up our different abort boundaries. So from a crew perspective, high Q gives us more abort options during the ascent, and the program has looked at the margins on the tank. They're very comfortable with the margins, both structurally and with the foam performance. So we believe it was the right decision to go high Q on 115. And as you said, with our heavy payload, low Q would have been very, very difficult for us to do.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today. I'm wondering how concerned you are for the potential for stiction, given the experience you had on STS-97 and the fact that the solar arrays weren't designed to stand the ground for as long as they have. And for the EVA astronauts, are there any operational workarounds? Is there anything you guys can do if an array gets stuck during deploy?
Well, I'm going to pass that one to Joe Tanner.
Figured you'd do that. Yeah, we're not too terribly concerned about stiction on the deploys. We know it might happen in certain panels. The team went hard to work after STS-97 to figure out the mechanism of stiction and what we can do to reduce it, and come up with a good operational plan to nominally deploy. It'll look very much like the second array that we deployed on STS-97, though we will wait for 30 minutes or so to let the arrays warm up, which they've proven from tests that will reduce the stiction. Now, if for some reason one or two panels sticks after all of that, then we can go out EVA. It'll be on EVA 3. And actually manually peel the panels apart for the first 40 inches or so of the panel, and then do a nominal deploy after that. And all of our tests say that they will peel open very easily with that kind of start. So we're not too terribly concerned about that.
Stephen Young with spaceflightnow.com for the Commander. This mission's being described as one of the most complex that NASA has attempted in the start of a whole series of far more complex assembly missions. I wonder if you could address that and perhaps describe what are the most challenging parts of this mission.
That's a fair question. I think all the missions between now and 2010 that involve station assembly are going to be extremely complex. You could probably make the case that each one is slightly more complex than the one that precedes it. Obviously, we are flying hardware that has no history in space. The SARs, the DLAs, those mechanisms, although they've been tested on the ground, we don't have any history with them on orbit. So those represent a special challenge in terms of both engineering and operations. I think the most challenging thing for us on this flight is going to be our timeline. We've put together a very aggressive first 5 or 6 days of the flight. We did that deliberately. It's probably the most aggressive timeline that's been flown on the shuttle ever. We think we're ready for it. We've been in training for 4.5 years, and we have some options if we get a little bit behind where we can relax that timeline. But that's going to be the most challenging part for us, is that first getting to solar array deploy on flight day 6.
Bill Horowitz, CBS. Well, another timeline question, Commander. I guess you guys have offloaded late inspection until after undocking, and you moved undocking up, I guess, a day. So you're undocking late in your crew day, and then late inspection later. Can you just tell me, a little bit about, I guess, lessons learned from 121, why you wanted to do that, why you got the schedule the way it is now? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've done a lot of evaluating of the timeline. Like Brent said, it is very aggressive early on. Somewhere down the line here, we'd like to get to the point where we get enough data on how the external tank performs, and we've got sensors in the wing leading edge, for example, for launch. That'll give us some real-time data during the ascent phase on if we did have an impact on the wing leading edge. But based on what we've seen already with Discovery, things are very encouraging. I think the changes that were made to the tank at Michoud were the right things to do, and we've got some at least an early look that shows that that's going to put us in a good condition from this point on. Still with that, we're going to do the late inspection. We're certainly going to do the flight day 2 inspection right after we get on orbit, and that'll be an end-to-end. Every bit of the RCC on the orbiter will check. Post-docking, we'll get the data on the tile on the underbelly of the orbiter during the rendezvous pitch maneuver. If there were things to come up during that pitch maneuver that shows us we may have gap fillers or other kinds of issues associated with the tiles on the belly of the orbiter, we could do a focus inspection. It may happen between EVAs 1 and 2. If the tiles look really good, as we're hoping they will, we wouldn't have a need to do that. The late inspection really is to protect us for things like micrometeoroid orbital debris hits during the time we spend on orbit. What we'd like to do, again, to offload some of the aggressive timeline that we have during the dock phase, is to move that after the dock period so that we could do that inspection afterwards. We're now carrying enough RCS propellant such that if we have a problem, we notice something during a late inspection post undocking, that we'll have the capability of coming back and rendezvousing.
Hi. Hold on a second. Let me just add real quick. That was a very thorough answer. I think that's the most I've heard Dan talk at one time in a while. But the other part of your question is from what the 121 crew told us. As you know, for the late inspection specifically, they did part of it docked. They did the port wing docked, and based on their debrief with us post-flight, that turned out to be much more difficult than they thought it was going to be pre-flight. So based on their comments to us and our discussions with our flight directors, we decided, as you said, to move the undock up about a half a day. We were going to undock the morning of flight day 10. We moved it up to the afternoon of flight day 9. And essentially on flight day 10, we will repeat the RCC inspection that we did on flight day 2. The same clearance views, the same procedure. So their experience told us that doing that the second time, they were much more efficient at it. It went very smoothly, as opposed to the docked inspection. Took a lot more time. A lot of that was due to some lighting issues that they had and clearance views. So we think that'll help us late in the timeline.
Hi, Mike Schneider with the Associated Press. As the commander alluded, this is going to be a very strenuous mission physically, and I was wondering if you all are doing anything in your physical regimen this week or over the next couple of weeks to prepare you for basically, I guess, the physical endurance of this mission.
Well, it's going to be strenuous from a timeline perspective, and that is strenuous both mentally and physically, I believe. I think the EVA teams have the most physical stress on them during the mission, so I'll throw that to one of the EVA crew members if they want to talk about physical training. Heidi?
Well, from the EVA perspective, yes, as Brent alluded to, EVAs are physically strenuous. It's a lot of work. You have to work in the suit. The suit is pressurized at 4.3 pounds, so you have to work at that pressure over it. And to prepare for that, most of us have been spending quite a lot of time in the gym doing weights to build up the forearm strength, build up the upper body strength, so that you're able to continue working for 6 hours straight. Now that we're getting closer to launch, much of that physical activity is geared more at just maintaining strength and not getting hurt in the gym. So you don't want to start doing max reps 2 weeks before launch. So it's just a continuation of what we've been doing, working on upper body strength. And for the endurance part of it, the 6 hours in the suit is a long time. And much of that is just general physical conditioning that we've been doing all along.
Hi, Dan Billow from Channel 2. A question about TPS and RCC repair, perhaps for Joe. Your EVAs obviously are geared toward assembly. I'm wondering how much time you spent preparing to make any repairs to RCC or TPS, should they be necessary. Do you have anything new to do that with? And have you had time to learn anything from STS-115, or is it not enough time to incorporate anything from that mission?
Yeah, I'll start from the back and work forward. The data from the RCC repairs has not come in really from 121. We've got anecdotal data on what they did, and we watched some of those repairs. From a personal point of view, I have been involved with TPS repair since we started doing really RCC work post-accident. I also got involved in some of the tile repair. I've done 3 vacuum chamber runs on tile repair, so I'm pretty up on all of that stuff. Both Dan and I have done a glove box run at vacuum on RCC repair, so we're fairly well qualified to work with that. So we don't have anything new. The overlay, if we should have to use it on tile, is the same one that 121 flew. We have worked with that and been trained well with that, so we're pretty comfortable with really anything that comes up that we should be called to repair.
Pat Devins again, WMFE, again for Joe. From your perspective, kind of from a historical perspective, how is this mission similar to STS-97 and how is it different?
I like to refer to this mission as the same as STS-97 with a twist. And the twist is the solar array rotary joint that we will be preparing. Most of that work is done by Dan and Steve, removing locks and restraints from the joint. And then Heidi and I, if we get to it on EVA-1, will engage the drive lock assemblies. So it's really very similar. The electrical connections and data connections are a little bit different, different style connector, but the principle is the same. Deploying the arrays and swinging the boxes is exactly the same. So we have history on that. The big unknown is how is this Sarge going to behave when we try to activate it. So it should be interesting, but hopefully not too interesting.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today again, I guess for Brent Jett. I'm wondering whether you consider this mission a turning point for the Shuttle program, and how important it is in your judgment for NASA to restart assembly of the International Space Station given the presidential deadline for finishing the outpost.
Well, I think that's actually a pretty easy question, Todd. I think this mission is, the restart of assembly, obviously, it fulfills the first objective of the President's vision, that is to return the shuttle to flight and complete the space station. We have to do that as an agency, and this mission marks the restart of the assembly sequence. But it's just that. It's just one of the assembly missions we have to get done, and they all have to I mean, every crew and every mission control team has to be on their game when we fly these assembly missions. We've got to do them right. We can handle some setbacks. We can deal with some problems, but we have to perform these missions well, and we have only a limited amount of time to do it. So they're all important. We treat them all as very important missions, and if we do our jobs right, we'll get to 2010 and we'll retire the shuttle safely. We'll see it come to a wheel stop not too far from here, and we'll have a complete station. And I think that's what we're really all looking forward to.
Bill Harvey again. It's kind of the same question from me, Commander. Knowing it, you're obviously going to spend the time and attention it needs to do this, but I'm not sure people maybe understand the technical complexity of these missions that are getting ready to come up. Can you just address that, just from an operator standpoint, physically doing this work? I mean, it looks really daunting. I mean, I know it's the same schedule that was pre-107 that you were getting ready to do then, and now you're finally ready to do it. But it's a big change from what we've seen over the last couple of years.
That's correct. It was a daunting schedule when it was laid out on paper years ago. These missions are all extremely complex. They all build on each previous mission in front of it. We build on it in two ways. Obviously, we progress in the assembly sequence. We learn about the hardware, especially the hardware we're flying for the first time. But I think also as a team, we learn, and we get a little bit more. We get a little more efficient each mission. I think each crew passes along, lessons learned to the next one, and you constantly see the timelines get a little bit more aggressive each mission, and that's a good thing. But it's also something that we have to be careful not. There is a limit as to how much you can do in 10 days or 12 days or 14 days in space. So we can get more efficient, but those gains will probably get smaller as we go along. I'd just like to say again that every crew likes to say that, boy, this is one of the most complex missions we've ever flown, and they're all that way, and they will be that way until we stop flying in 2010.
Hi, Sandra Frederick, Daytona Beach News Journal. It's been about 4 years since Atlantis has flown. Any worries about that?
Not from me. Any of you guys have any worries? Fergie?
Probably the one thing, having a vehicle be in the OPF for such a long time might be just debris. I think that Discovery saw that the first time that they had flown after a while, maybe just a little bit of extra, yes, I'm sorry, debris inside. Just maybe bits of dust, dirt, paint chips, and maybe some wire insulation. But I think other than that, the vehicle's been gone over with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, they've had 4.5 years, and it's been prepared for flight. I think this is probably the third time. So there's no doubt in my mind that Atlantis has looked as good as it's ever looked.
We'll conclude the opportunity at this point. The crew is going to stop here for just a moment and allow you all to get some pictures, and then we'll see them again once they're on board the shuttle. So thank you very much.
Ich denke, alle Missionen bis zum Jahre 2010, die der Installation auf der ISS dienen, sind äußerst kompliziert. Man kann wahrscheinlich sagen, jede ist ein bisschen komplizierter als die vorausgehende. Die Hardware, die wir in den Weltraum bringen, ist etwas, was es bisher noch nicht gegeben hat. Die SARs, die DLAs, die sind zwar schon am Boden erprobt worden, aber wir wissen nicht, wie sie sich im Weltraum verhalten. Das ist sicherlich technisch und auch was den Betrieb anbelangt eine Herausforderung. Am herausforderndsten wird aber der Zeitplan meiner Auffassung nach sein. Die ersten 5 oder 6 Tage sind sehr aggressiv durchgeplant und das ganz bewusst. Ist wahrscheinlich wirklich der aggressivste Zeitplan, den es je bei einem Shuttle gegeben hat. Wir meinen, wir sind gut darauf vorbereitet. Wir haben ja über 4,5 Jahre trainiert und wir haben auch Optionen, wie wir den Zeitplan vielleicht noch ein bisschen lockern können. Aber zunächst einmal müssen wir die beiden Solarpaneele ja auch installieren. Der Kommandeur sagte ja schon, das wird eine sehr auch körperlich anstrengende Mission sein. Wie halten Sie sich körperlich fit in dieser Woche und auch in den nächsten Wochen, um sich vorzubereiten, einfach auf die körperlichen Anstrengungen dieser Mission? Ja, es wird sicherlich anstrengend sein, einmal was die Zeitplanung anbelangt, aber auch natürlich mental und körperlich. Ich denke, die für den Außeneinsatz vorgesehen sind, die werden sicherlich die größte körperliche Anstrengung auszuhalten haben. Vielleicht darf eine von denen jetzt die Frage beantworten. Heidi, bitte. Ja, aus Sicht der Astronauten, die beim Außeneinsatz zum Einsatz kommen, kann ich sagen, natürlich ist ein Außeneinsatz körperlich äußerst anstrengend. Wir müssen in einem Druckanzug mit einem Druck von 4,3 Pfund arbeiten. Und um uns darauf vorzubereiten, haben wir sehr viel trainiert, Gewicht gehoben, um den Oberkörper und die Muskeln dort zu stärken, damit man wirklich auch 6 Stunden durchgängig arbeiten kann. Jetzt kurz vor dem Start zielen die Übungen eigentlich auf den Erhalt der Kraft ab. Man will sich nicht verletzen, man will sich hier nicht verausgaben 2 Wochen vor dem Start. Also im Grunde versuchen wir, die Muskeln des Oberkörpers weiterhin fit zu halten und wie gesagt 6 Stunden im Raumanzug, das ist schon sehr lang. Da muss man also wirklich körperlich fit sein und darauf haben wir uns ja vorbereitet.
Das Space Shuttle Atlantis, benannt nach einem bedeutenden Forschungsschiff der USA, fliegt seit 1985 in den Weltraum. 26 Missionen hat dieser Orbiter schon auf den Flügeln. Mit der Endeavour und der Discovery ist die Atlantis der 3. einsatzbereite Raumgleiter für die bemannten Flüge der NASA. Beim Bau der Atlantis profitierten die Konstrukteure von den Erfahrungen, die man vorher beim Entwickeln und Testen der Enterprise, Challenger und Columbia gemacht hatte. Sie wog zum Beispiel rund 3000 Kilogramm weniger als die Columbia und es konnten beim Bau sogar die Hälfte der Arbeitsstunden eingespart werden. Während der Konstruktion entschied die NASA, Ersatzteile anfertigen zu lassen. Sie sollten die Reparatur im Falle eines Unfalls erleichtern. Diese Ersatzteile kamen allerdings später der Endeavour zugute. Von 1995 bis 1997 kam die Atlantis zum Einsatz, um im Rahmen des Shuttle-Mir-Programms Raumfahrer zur russischen Raumstation Mir zu bringen. Dazu ist sie speziell mit einem Docking-Adapter russischer Bauart ausgestattet gewesen. Ab 1997 wurde sie erneut umgebaut. Zahlreiche Verbesserungen wurden vorgenommen. Die Atlantis erhielt neue Rohre, Verkabelungen, über 800 neue Hitzeschutzkacheln, Bremsschirme und ein gläsernes Cockpit. Zurzeit steht die Atlantis wieder auf der Rampe des Kennedy Space Centers in Florida. Nach der Discovery, die Thomas Reiter Anfang Juli auf die internationale Raumstation brachte, ist sie jetzt das nächste Space Shuttle am Start. Sie soll diese Crew zur ISS bringen. Missionsname STS-115. Die Astronauten bereiten sich seit Monaten darauf vor und sind jetzt körperlich in Topform.
EVAs are physically strenuous.
Natürlich ist ein Außeneinsatz körperlich äußerst anstrengend. Wir müssen in einem Druckanzug mit einem Druck von 4,3 Pfund arbeiten. Und um uns darauf vorzubereiten, haben wir sehr viel trainiert, Gewicht gehoben, um den Oberkörper und die Muskeln dort zu stärken, damit man wirklich auch 6 Stunden durchgängig arbeiten kann.
3 Weltraumausstiege sind auf dieser Mission geplant. Denn die Atlantis hat 2 weitere Solarmodule mit an Bord. Diese Kollektoren sollen etwa 1/4 des Energiebedarfs der internationalen Raumstation decken. Die Paneele und Gitter müssen an der ISS montiert und ausgefaltet werden. Auch das kürzlich dort installierte Experiment Misse wird wieder hereingeholt und Wartung und Kontrolle der Außenseite der Atlantis vor dem Rückflug stehen an.
Good afternoon and welcome to the pre-flight briefings for the STS-115 crew. We'll begin this afternoon with some short introductions and comments by the crew, and then we'll turn to questions. I'd like to begin by introducing the mission commander and Navy Captain Brent Jett, who comes to us having graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and carries a master's degree from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. He's a Navy pilot and a test pilot with over 450 carrier landings. He has logged over 4,800 miles and over 30 different types of aircraft. He entered the Astronaut Corps in 1992 and has flown 3 times previously. On STS-115 in 1996, he was the pilot. On STS-81 in 1997, he was the pilot again aboard the Atlantis on a mission to Mir. And then on STS-97 in 2000, he was the mission commander on the 5th mission to the International Space Station. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Brent to do the rest, to start the introductions to the rest of the crew.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming out today. As you heard from the briefings this morning, this is a very challenging and complex assembly mission with a very aggressive timeline, especially over the first 5 to 7 days. As we sit here today, I can tell you that the crew is ready to execute our part of that mission. We have confidence in our training. We have confidence in the crew that's on orbit who will execute the mission with us. And we have confidence in the teams on the ground, the team at Kennedy who will launch us, and the teams here in Houston who will execute just as much of the mission as we will. It's been a privilege over the last 4.5 years to work with these folks, and we're proud to be part of the team. With that, let me introduce the shuttle pilot, Chris Ferguson. He's also a Navy captain. Flew F-14s in the Navy, so he's a fellow Tomcat driver as well as a test pilot. This will be Chris's first space mission. And you can read all the details in his bio about where he graduated and where he's from, Philly and Drexel University. But shuttle pilots are often the overlooked crew member, on flights. They rarely get questions at press conferences. Their duties rarely get, discussed much. But I'll tell you, if I was allowed to pick a pilot to fly with, I couldn't have picked a better person than Chris Ferguson. Not only is he very professionally competent, he's just a great guy to have on the crew. Chris he'll probably downplay what he is going to be responsible for in the mission, in addition to the standard pilot things like undock and fly around. And he'll be doing a lot of the robotics work during the inspections. He'll be the primary sharing that duty with Dan. But the biggest thing is, I trust Chris completely. In fact, so much so, many times during the mission, I'll be locked in the airlock with the EVA crews, and Chris will be totally in charge of the shuttle. And of course, I have confidence in him that no matter what would arise during that time, that he would be able to handle it. He's been just a pleasure to work with over 4.5 years. So, Chris?
Very kind introduction, Brennan. Thank you very much. As Brent said, my primary focus, in addition to handling all the important switches over on the right-hand side of the cockpit, will be to back up Dan Burbank, who you'll hear from in just a moment, with a lot of the robotics tasks. When we first started training for this mission about 4.5 years ago, robotics was a relatively small operation. It was going to take just a few hours and it was going to be over. Now it seems like robotics operations with the arm and the onboard, the boom sensor system is going to take up the better part of flight day 2 and then an entire day after we undock. So I'd like to consider it my contribution to the mission. I'm delighted to be a part and very proud to be a part of this crew of 6 fine people. With that, I'd like to introduce the gentleman to my right, your left, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction, especially around the center. Joe Tanner is a veteran spacewalker, veteran of STS-66, 82, 97. Fantastic gentleman. He's been a mentor to me, and he will be the EV1, the lead EVA member for this crew. And without further ado, Joe Tanner.
Thank you, Chris. I'm really looking forward to this flight. Yes, we've been training for 4.5 years, but this is kind of a coming home sort of thing for me to get back doing EVA on the same type of hardware that Carlos Noriega and I worked on in 2000. P3, P4 is very much like P6, and I guess as you heard this morning, that may have had some bearing on why Brent and I are on this crew. But I'm just really looking forward to actually performing the EVAs and working the challenges with the ground team. We think we have the best ground team. You met John Hainsley this morning. I think he's the very best. Hopefully he won't have too much to report other than mission accomplished as planned. during the briefings during the mission. But look forward to working with him and John Ray and Roger Lottridge and the rest of the EVA team that will be supporting us. I think my biggest thrill, though, is going to be watching, and in some cases in very close proximity, but watching my crewmates, my EVA crewmates, going out for the first time, because that is a special thing, to actually stick your head out that hatch that first time and say, oh wow, here I am. But getting to watch Heidi excel at EVA is going to be a thrill for me, maybe as much as it's going to be a thrill for her. And then watching Dan and Steve on their EVA excelling as well and doing everything just like we trained and having a good time. If you're not having fun, then you're missing out on part of the thrill of spaceflight. So that's probably going to be, that probably will end up being the highlight of the flight for me, just to watch them. To my right now is Dan Burbank. He's a commander in the Coast Guard. He's class of 1996. He flew once on STS-115, and he made me promise not to make any comments about how capable he is. But I'll just give you an example. He was assigned to 106 and I think has set the record for the shortest training flow for a rookie to prepare for that, and then did an exceptional job on the flight. So, Dan?
Thanks very much, Joe. We just got back from a great couple of days we spent down at KSC looking at the hardware. And it's been a long time since we actually had a chance to look at the P3, P4 truss. And I probably speak for all of us when I say it's just a spectacular piece of equipment. It's wonderful to see it in the payload bay. Just to be a part of this mission and to get to participate in that with Chris in unberthing the payload, and with Steve and handing it over to the station arm. It's a really neat mission. We've got a great mix of spacewalks and a lot of robotics ops. And we've been training for a long time for it with the backup of just a tremendous team here on the ground. You know, from my own personal perspective, you know, working with these folks here has been a real treat. I've just been pedaling as hard as I can for the last 4.5 years to keep up with them, and just can't wait for the chance to actually fly this mission and work with them on orbit. To my right, to your left, is Captain Heidi Piper, Definition Piper. Heidi was a Navy diver before she came to NASA, and she's going to back up Steve with a lot of the robotic ops with the space station arm. And as Joe mentioned, she's a terrifically talented spacewalker, and I'm hoping to learn a lot from both of them when they do their first EVA on EVA-1.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, I am definitely very excited on this flight. This is going to be my first flight, and I hope I don't have too many other extra words sticking my head out of the hatch other than, oh, wow, because it'll be the 4th day on orbit when I go outside with Joe and do EVA-1. So just as soon as Steve gets the element attached to P3, P4, then Joe and I get to go to work. And I'm definitely very, very much excited about that. And the rest of the mission, in addition, you know, Dan and Steve go out and do another EVA, and then we get to, on the 6th day, deploy the solar arrays. And that's going to be another exciting moment to look out the cameras and say, wow, as these giant arrays fold out. And then one more EVA after that, and then we do some more cleanup steps. So it's definitely, as they've all mentioned, it's definitely a very full mission. But one that we're very, very eager to get started with, because it's been a long time. I guess Dan gets the record as the rookie with the shortest training flow, and I get the record as the rookie with the longest training flow. So I don't know if I want that one attached to my name. To my left, we have Steve McLean from the Canadian Space Agency, and as Dan mentioned, I'll be doing some robotic operations, but Steve's got the brunt of that. He gets to install the largest payload that we've taken up, the 35,000-pound P3, P4 truss, and installing that with the Canadian arm. And Steve is the first Canadian to operate the Canadian arm, so a number of firsts on this flight. Steve?
Thank you. You know, I think the thing that's the largest privilege for me I'll get to something else at the end as well, but just the fact that how much Canadian technology is on this mission for me is a tremendous privilege. I've been working in this business for a while now, and most of the technology that we represent are their friends and colleagues of mine who have put it together, and this is a tremendous privilege for me to be able to operate this technology throughout the course of the mission. We have Canadarm1, Canadarm2, which is attached to the base for the mobile transporter system, and on Flight Day 4, Dan's going to reach into the cargo bay with Canadarm1. He's going to pick it up and hand it to me on Canadarm2. And don't be surprised if Canadian media call that the Great Canadian Handshake. And but we are handshaking with a payload that is impressive, a billion-dollar payload that's very high-tech, that's going to carry us forward to having the best orbiting laboratory in the world, and I really look forward to that. And so Canada and Canadians are, I think, making the station more operational, and it really is a privilege to be a part of that. We also contribute to making spaceflight safer with the addition of the boom, which comes from MDR and the laser camera system, and that combination plays a major role during the focused inspection. I think we're making spaceflight safer, and that for me is a tremendous good feeling as well. The personal highlight, though, for me is going to be the EVA. Joe alluded to the feelings and the expressions you have when you go out the door, and I can basically just hardly wait for that. I'm really looking forward to it. I will finish, though, with I did not get to introduce anybody here, so I'm going to introduce the whole team. I've been training with these guys for 4.5 years. It really has been an amazing experience. They are all on the Navy, and I am not. I have a family that was involved in shipbuilding, though, so that provides some bonding. But over the 4.5 years, I really feel like I've been part of a dream team. And in the 16 days, I guess, we're going to be on a dream adventure, and I really look forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, we'd like to take questions now here in Houston. And if you would, please restrain yourself to a single question at this point, because we will be going to a couple of other locations. And we'll begin with Gina. Please give us your name and affiliation, and also direct the question to an astronaut, please.
Gina Sinceri, ABC News for Chris Ferguson. Mike Kelly on the last flight, do you remember the day when he said, "We're back"? You're the "We're back" crew. Talk to me how important this flight is for the rest of NASA's history with the shuttle. You've got, 17 missions in 4 years. What does "We're back" mean to you?
Oh, this is an exciting flight and an exciting time, I think. After Columbia, we took a little while to recover. We took a couple of years off, and then we had what was defined as more 2 test flights to get us back on the step, to resupply the International Space Station with logistics using NPLM. But this, I think, really signifies the beginning of the culmination of the space station. You'll see a series of assembly flights over the next couple of years here that have been unparalleled, I think, in their complexity and their details and their timelines, which are extremely compressed. So I'd like to think that we are truly back on the step. It'll be a pleasure to leave the station in a much different configuration than when we first arrived. It's been slightly over 4 years, I think, since we made a significant addition to the space station. And it'll be nice, hopefully, propellant allowing to do a fly around at the end of that mission and take some great photos. So this is the beginning of the culmination of the space station, and I think we're all proud to be part of it.
Hi, Mark Kirkman, Interspace News. Well, since I'm limited to one, I'll go with the technical question here. Since there's a lot of emphasis on the performance of the tank, I noticed that at each step there's about a 30-second delay in doing the photo maneuver, and I was wondering what that gains you in terms of, I guess it's a performance margin is the reason. Are you going to be further from the tank at that point? Does that affect the photos? And I guess that's for either Brent, and I don't want to go up to PLT, so he's welcome to answer too.
I'll take the first half of that and maybe let Joe comment a little bit on the photos. You're correct. We are delaying 30 seconds before we initiate the pitch maneuver to bring the tank into view. That was initially done because, you're exactly right, because of performance. After the main engine shut down, there is the NPS dump sequence starts, and that normally adds a little, gives you a little bit more delta V to what you had at MECO. By doing the pitch maneuver, you're now using that delta V, that that delta V allows you to pitch by going free drift in the pitch axis. I know that sounds fairly complex, but by taking the shuttle out of plane, you're now taking that delta V and not putting it in plane, but you're taking it out of plane. So you lose a little bit of performance. At the time we decided to do that maneuver, our performance was extremely critical. We've gotten a little bit better over the past couple months, one because of the month we happen to be launching in, helps us a little bit. Now, as far as how does that affect the photos, the primary photos that we use to analyze the tank performance are taken right at separation through the ET umbilical camera. And those photos are taken automatically, and after we separate from the tank, we do a maneuver called a +X maneuver, which allows that camera to get full coverage of the tank. The handheld photos that Joe and Steve will take are probably used more qualitatively than quantitatively by the engineering community. They do give them some good data, but I think they rely primarily on the ET umbilical well photos. As far as the distance, I don't think it's significantly further than the primary maneuver, but Joe, maybe you know. I don't think I have that number.
I don't have the number. I know that it fills the viewfinder of a 400 millimeter lens. Unfortunately, we're shooting at a fixed f8 thousandth of a second shutter speed, so we need a fair amount of light to take that kind of a picture, and our predict on August 27th launch does not give us enough light. So right now we're most likely not going to get very good, if any, handheld photography.
We'll do, obviously we'll take what we can get, and we'll take the pictures, and if we get the tank to roll maybe the right way and catch a little bit of, lighting, we might get lucky and get some good pictures.
Over to Bill. Bill Harwood, CBS for Joe. All of us have been asking you guys questions about the complexities of these flights coming up because there's such a big change, I guess, from the way things have been going. But as an HST guy, is this like just a better way of looking at it? Is it like an HST flight every time? Because I always look at HST missions from an EVA standpoint as kind of the benchmark for workload and complexity. I mean, is it in that category or something less than that?
Well, I've been asked that question many times, difference in complexity between an HST mission and a station mission. They both have their challenges. There are things about an HST mission that are easier. The distances that you travel, translate, are much shorter. You're always within view of your IV crew and arm operator from the aft cabin. Station mission, you're almost always out of view. Translations are much longer. The objects that you are maneuvering are much larger masses, typically, except for the large science instruments, which of course are 900 pounds or so. But we're working with things even bigger than that in some of these missions coming ahead. So I don't see that. I wouldn't say that every HST mission is harder than any shuttle mission or station assembly mission. I think you have to look individually at the tasks, how much time you have to train for them, the potential for things to go wrong, and contingency procedures that you have to develop, and assess it in that manner. Some of the things we do in station are quite simple. Have to be done, of course, but they're not terribly, from a technical point of view, too challenging. Should we get another HST mission, they have some tasks on there that are off scale from what we've ever tried before. In the STS, if you know about that instrument. If they can pull that one off, then gold star, because that's going to be really, really tough. So I think each individual mission is different. You have to look at the individual tasks and the preparation of the crew.
If I could just add something to Joe's answer. And I think Joe did a great job of addressing it from an EVA perspective. But as a person who's inside as the IV, I've had the experience of putting shuttle crews out the shuttle airlock, and based on my training for putting a shuttle crew out a station airlock, especially on back-to-back EVAs, the overhead is significantly higher. So from that perspective, the ability to do consecutive EVAs from the station airlock, that's quite a bit of complexity. And when you look at the complexity of adding robotics with 2 arms, simultaneous robotics, from the inside, it can be quite complex on station.
Mark Carreau, Houston Chronicle, and my question's for Brent and Joe as well. How does having flown the 97 mission help you accomplish this mission, and what are some of the ways where that experience really doesn't make a lot of difference?
Do you want me to start, John?
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I was kind of expected to hear that question because I heard it this morning. You know, when Joe and I were first assigned to this mission, we showed up at one of the first early meetings, and the flight director was Jeff Hanley, who was a flight director from the station side on the 4A mission. Just about everybody in the room we knew from that mission. When we went to the contractors, we knew all the people. So we started out with a lot of the same team migrating directly to 115 and 12A. But of course, over the course of time, a lot of those folks have gone on to do new things. And so the number of people that have the corporate knowledge and the experience back to 97 has been reduced. So I think in one aspect, we do help provide some of the corporate knowledge along with, you know, a core group of other folks who have been fortunate enough to have been able to stay with the mission over a period of time. Aside from that, it's just another 4 years of familiarity with the hardware that I think hopefully will pay off.
And Mark, I'm a little bit of a slower learner, so having actually done some of these things before really helps me. It's a level of comfort that wouldn't be there if I hadn't done these tests before. And we've used my helmet camera and film and Carlos's helmet camera views to help train us on tasks. We got a NASA antenna R&R added late, as John told you this morning. And so we just pulled out helmet cam and said, okay, this is what those bolts look like, and this is the position that you have to be in to do things, and this is kind of what it looks like in flight, because there isn't a ground one to look at. So that added level of comfort, I think, has really helped, and we've used some of our experience, I think, to help us train more effectively for this mission.
Okay, we have time for just a few more questions here in Houston before we head over to KSC, so off to Tarek, please.
Thank you. Tarek Malik with Space.com and Space News. I think for Brent, I'm curious, you know, with the years of build towards this mission, you know, how challenging it was to keep, you know, everyone together and on track as you went into training, out of training, and then back into the flying it.
Well, I'd like to take credit for the fact that we're one of the few crews that were assigned before the Columbia accident, and we actually were able to all stay together and keep the crew the same. And our mission really hasn't changed significantly. We've added, of course, the inspections. I'd like to take credit for that. I might have had some influence in that, but that decision was mostly out of my hands. In terms of the training itself, it's important for a crew to be really peaked and really have an edge when they launch into space. I think that's pretty common knowledge among all the commanders. So it was just a matter of understanding when, after the accident, to let everyone have some downtime, go off and do other jobs, help the office in the return to flight effort, and then picking the right time to come back and focus on the mission. But with these folks, they've made it real easy, so it hasn't been too difficult at all.
Okay, Alan here.
Alan Boyle with MSNBC. I wanted to ask about the mindset that you have for this mission, because we've gone through the two test missions, but on the other hand, commanders generally say that every mission from now on is a test mission. Can you give a little more detail about how your mindset is different for this mission than the mindset might have been for the previous two missions?
Well, I don't think I really approached the mission any differently. What is different for us in this case is the fact that we have these additional inspections that we're going to do, and I kind of consider that a carryover from the test missions. We understand that we need to get some data on the tank after we get to orbit. We need to inspect the thermal protection system early for ascent debris, and then again we're going to inspect the RCC late for micrometeorite damage. So it's almost like you can pick and choose the days of our mission and say, okay, this is really a legacy of the test objectives from the previous mission, and then the other days we're really focused on the operations and the assembly of the station.
Okay, one last one, Chris. Right there.
Chris Kreiber from Florida today. You've been hearing a lot of questions, serious questions about how complicated this is and what hard work it is. And I just wanted to know, after 4 years of spending a lot of time together, do you have any running jokes or nicknames you call one another or anything like that?
Not that we're going to tell. That's a tough one. We do. You're with a group of folks for an extended period of time, and you become really like family. And just like any family, we have our inside jokes, and it's been, I'll tell you, it makes the time that we spend together really enjoyable.
All right, and with that, we'll head over to Kennedy Space Center and take a few questions from our place of launch.
Hi, this is Todd Halverson of Florida Today for Dan Burbank, I think. I'm just curious, this is a big mission for the agency, resuming station construction, and I was wondering how it feels to have the future of the U.S. human spaceflight program on your shoulders.
Thanks, Todd. No pressure there. Well, I don't know. I think, from my own perspective, this really is a great crew, and my crewmates here, I mean, I could not have picked a more talented, more capable group. Starting with Joe, which is, who's among the most experienced EVA flyers that I think we've ever had, coupled with his experience specific to the solar arrays and the activities we're going to do. But just across the board, this is just a really great team, and we've had a lot of people on the ground that are incredibly talented and put in unbelievable hours and lots of hard work over a long period of time to get us ready. And from my own perspective, certainly as we climb aboard the vehicle on the day of launch, as we wake up on the morning that we're going to go out, EVA, for example, the first time, or as Chris and I get ready the first time to unberth P3, P4, all the different big events, I think there'll be a little bit of butterflies and certainly hoping everything goes well. But I think deep down, I feel pretty confident in that the training and the preparation that all the folks have given us, leading into this is going to stand us in good stead. Again, it's just a wonderful team. So I mean, I'm not doing this alone, and none of us are doing this alone. And I think it's going to be a great mission. I think it's going to be real successful.
Phil Long, Miami Herald. This is kind of a more philosophical question for Brent. With all the discussion and safety issues of the last one, and kind of picking up on what you said about family a few moments ago, when you talk about these things, safety, et cetera, how do you balance the risk against the gain? And sort of a second part to that, in the free time that you're going to have, what little there may be, and you look down and think about kids down here on Earth, what kind of hopes and aspirations would you have for them in these troubled times that we're in?
Okay, that's, I guess, an easy question. I guess the first part of your question was, how do we balance risk versus reward in terms of the risk of flying in space, is what I'm sure you're alluding to. I think there's a couple ways you can look at it. Certainly, spaceflight carries inherent risk. There's a tremendous number of folks on the ground who work to completely understand those risks and to mitigate them when it's possible. Obviously, we can't eliminate all of the risks, but flying in space is worthwhile from a perspective of improving life here on Earth. But it's also a very personal, rewarding experience. Sure, we're accepting some personal risk, but the personal reward is great, and hopefully, once we complete the station, the benefit to folks here on Earth will be worth it as well. When you compare the risks that we take to some of the risks that our colleagues in the armed forces are faced with on a daily basis, I'm not sure you can really compare the two. So not only is it personally rewarding for us, but we get to hopefully benefit all of humankind with the research that will be done on the station.
Thank you. And now we'll jump over to NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Tracy watching USA Today for the commander. I think you're the last commander, at least the name for the upcoming flight, to have as many flights under his belt as you do. And I'm wondering what you think about flying such a series of complex missions with people who have maybe a little bit less experience than you at heading the missions. What are the risks? What are the rewards?
Well, let me just put it this way. The person sitting to my right after this mission will only have one space flight, but he will be perfectly ready and capable of leading. I would have no hesitation at all of having Chris command the most complicated mission that is remaining in the assembly sequence. So I don't think it's really a function of how many missions you have. It's really a function of what experience you have on your previous flight, and as well as the type of training and mentoring that you can receive while you're getting ready. If you have someone who has a little bit less experience, often we can use some of our flown commanders to act as a mentor during the training process and help them be as prepared as they can be for the challenges that they're going to face.
Thank you, and now we'll go to Montreal for questions from Canada. I think we have 7 questions for the next about 20 minutes.
Jean-Philippe Rousseau, Radio-Canada. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous répéter, Steve, s'il vous plaît, en français, votre sentiment par rapport à la mission et à la technologie canadienne qui se trouve?
Je me sens très privilégié parce qu'on a autant de technologies canadiennes sur la mission. On a la Canada Arm 1, Canada Arm 2, le système d'entretien mobile. Puis aussi, on a la poutre qu'on va utiliser pour inspecter la navette, puis le système de laser de 3 dimensions, qui est une technologie qui a été inventée à le Conseil de recherche à Ottawa, qui est très important. Cette technologie, par exemple, peut imprimer un doigt. Ça, c'est une chose qui est très bon pour l'inspection des ailes de la navette. Ainsi, pour moi, vu que j'ai entraîné et je connais presque tous les gars qui ont fait la technologie pendant les 20 dernières années, je me sens très privilégié d'être un participant dans ça. Je me sens très privilégié de faire tout ce travail pour eux. Et ça me donne un bon feeling, si on veut, quand je parle comme ça. Ainsi, le Canada est en train de faire la station spatiale plus opérationnelle, puis le Canada est en train de faire tous les vols en orbite plus en sécurité. Et ça, c'est une chose que je pense que tout le Canada doit être fier de tout ça. Moi, je suis fier de ça et j'ai hâte de faire tout ce qu'on va faire dans cette mission qui est assez complexe. Et je dois dire aussi que la sortie extravéhiculaire que je vais faire sur le 5e jour de la mission, ça va être pour moi merveilleux et j'ai hâte de faire ça peut-être en plus.
Hi, this is Hanha from the Globe and Mail. This question for Joe Tada. You were speaking earlier about the difference between EVAs in the proximity of a shuttle and the EVAs of this mission. For the benefit of our readers, can you describe a bit what are those differences? For example, how much time it would take you to hand translate from the airlock to position, what distance you would cover, and in what way would it look and feel different from previous EVAs?
Okay, the translation time is probably 10 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes, depending on what you have to do along the way to get from the airlock to our eventual work site on P3, P4. It's a long enough distance that we have to do 2 tether swaps, that was mentioned this morning. We start on an airlock tether, go about 45 or so feet, and then get on an additional tether that is pre-staged for us, and go another about 50 feet, and then we get on a 85-foot long tether to do all of our work. Now that takes a little while to go that far. In a shuttle mission, you get on one tether, you stay on it for the whole duration of that mission typically. And there's a little psychological factor here as well. When you are that far away from home plate, if you will, for your safety net. And especially at night, it can get a little bit unnerving when you're out there by yourself and you realize that it's a long way back to home. So you get used to it, and I don't think it's it's a huge factor in the EVAs, but you are working out way out on the end of the station.
Daniel Lee, OBSAT.com for Steve. During the last 3 years since the Columbia accident, in addition to giving you more time to train, has something changed in the planning of the task you're going to accomplish during your EVA?
Yeah, we were 12 weeks away from flight during the Columbia accident, and the mission was well defined at that time. For the most part, that part has not changed. I guess we have one less EVA than we did initially, but our major goal is to, assemble the P3, P4 truss to the P1 truss and get it onto the space station, and then do the EVAs to get the solar power panels out so that we can basically double the power that's available to the station and also have a reserve path for electricity. So that part of the mission hasn't changed. What has changed is the fact that I think we only had 3 or 4 days of robotics back then. Now on the mission, out of 11 days, we have an 11 plus 2-day contingency plus 2-day weather mission. Out of 11 days, Heidi and I and Jeff Williams, who's on station, will be operating the arm 8 days out of those 11 days. And we have 3 different times where we do inspection. So we have the quick inspections on flight day 2. We may have focus inspections if we have some issues somewhere in the middle of the mission. And in addition to that, we have the late inspection, which is to handle the fact that we may have had a micrometeorite hit during the mission. And so that part of the mission is different. Now, in addition, our training, because we had the extra time, we have cross-trained in terms of spacewalking, where I think each of us can do everybody's job. And so if something comes up that's a bit of a surprise and a couple of guys need to go outside to do something different, one of us can fill back in and do the main part of those EVAs. And that has made the training very exciting to actually compare. Joe is the king of EVA, and so to watch him do a mission and then execute it the next day, kind of on his behalf to help him, but also to train us, has made the last 3 years special, if you like. It really has been an experience to train. I think we've trained every get-ahead that's available on station in terms of an EVA, and all the contingency tasks as well. So the difference is we were ready to fly 12 weeks after the Columbia accident, but after 3 years of training, we are much more prepared to handle all the contingencies that might happen.
Tanya Burkbeck from CBC Radio. Steve, I'm just wondering, how will you be spending the final days, both in preparation technically and in training, but also preparing yourself personally for the flight?
Well, we just came back from Florida late last night from what's called TCDT, which is Terminal Countdown Demonstration Test, basically a dress rehearsal for the launch. And I don't know, is that the last time we put the suit on before we do it for Rio? Yeah, that's the last time we put the suit on before we do it for Rio. And we had our last EVA runs. I guess Joe and Heidi had their last EVA run on Monday, but Dan and I had ours just maybe 10 days ago or so. And each time, during each of the, especially the EVA one, when I finished that EVA and took my suit off, it was a tremendous feeling to think that, boy, the next time I put this on, we'll be really going out the door. And it really was exciting. Now, over the next 2 weeks, we still have a few blocks to check off. This morning, we did our last contingency ascent run. We have 2 more ascent sims to do over the next 2 weeks. Over the weekend, next weekend, we go into quarantine. We'll spend 8 days or so in quarantine. And in quarantine, that's a place where we have a bit of time to relax and go over highlights. For example, we will bring in small pieces of hardware from the tools chest and EVA and just kind of familiarize yourself with them for one last time. And actually, I really look forward to getting into quarantine because it gives you a chance to sort of settle down on your own, think about what you're going to do, finalize all the points that you're a little bit concerned about, and also get to spend more time with the great team we have here.
Bonjour, Bruno Coulomb pour la radio de Radio-Canada. Une question en français pour Steve McLean. D'un point de vue plus personnel, qu'est-ce que cette deuxième mission dans l'espace représente pour vous dans la mesure où vous attendez cette chance depuis plusieurs années?
Okay, I'll just translate the question. First of all, he asked what the differences are basically between my first mission and my second mission from a personal point of view. And ça, c'est une question qui m'intriguait beaucoup pendant des années, parce que la première fois que j'ai volé en space, c'était comme spécialiste de charge utile. On avait une charge qui était assez importante. On a vérifié un système de vision spatiale qu'on va utiliser sur la mission pour mettre les deux poutres ensemble. Et ça, c'est une chose qui est importante pour moi. Mais la différence, c'est que la première mission, pour la plupart, était une mission de la science. On a fait beaucoup de choses dans la haute atmosphère, beaucoup d'études dans la haute atmosphère. On a fait des choses médicales et aussi on a fait des choses avec des matériaux dans la navette. Une chose que j'ai faite, c'était une expérience avec le cancer où on a travaillé avec les cellules de cancer dans l'espace en train de séparer les cellules normales des cellules de cancéreux. Et pour moi, c'était quelque chose que j'étais fier de participer là-dedans. Maintenant, on a une mission opérationnelle. On a fait un essai sur mon premier vol et maintenant, c'est une mission où on va utiliser les bras canadiens beaucoup de fois, puis je vais avoir une sortie à l'extérieur. Les deux sont merveilleux et je suis... C'était quelque chose que je pouvais participer dans les deux façons, d'être un astronaute scientifique si on veut, et maintenant être un astronaute opérationnel. Ça, c'était très bon pour moi. I'll just summarize what I said. They asked the difference between my first mission and my second mission, and it won't take as long. I was a payload specialist on my first mission and did a series of science experiments in the upper atmosphere, material science, and some very interesting medical experiments. In fact, we tested the space vision system on my flight as well over 5 days. We took it through all the assembly, berthing, grappling operations, and we will use that system when we berth the P3, P4 thrust to P1. And so the basic difference was I had the opportunity to be a researcher in space, I guess, if you like, and interactive experiments, and now I have that opportunity to be very operational, and I'm looking forward to the second flight.
Rob Lurie, CTV, Montreal. Steve, I just want to know, what is the difference on an emotional level for you as you embark on this second mission? Are you more excited? Are you more nervous this time around? Do you feel that you're more aware of what to expect? So how do you feel emotionally?
You know, those are tough questions to answer. It's another way to ask it. Am I going to sleep the night before we launch? Someone asked me that the other day, and you know, there's parts of it. The answer is yes, I will sleep well before I launch, and part of it is probably because we train so hard we get tired. But part of it isn't true. If you're 5 years old and Christmas was the next morning and you're going to wake up, and in our house you weren't allowed to wake up until 7 o'clock to go get the presents. And I can remember lying in bed just waiting to be able to open presents. And doing an EVA is a little bit like that. The next morning is Christmas, and there's a wonderful gift waiting at the hatch of the space station. And there's no question that I'll be thinking about that as I fall asleep. Emotional is a big word. We have a great team here. There's a lot at stake. Dan was asked a question about having the entire American space program on his shoulders. I don't feel like that. We have such a small role. I don't feel that kind of pressure. I do feel pressure for the little piece of a puzzle that I play, and I certainly hope that I do that well. And we take it a step at a time. Flight Day 4 has one big event. If you look at it all the mission all together, it looks huge, and it is huge. But when you separate it into its components, it's something that we've all trained for. I have great guys to work with, and hopefully it all goes well.
Peter Ray from Canadian Press. Steve, the last time you were there was 14 years ago. A lot has happened there. I'm just going to pursue what my colleague was asking you about the emotional state. A lot has happened over those 14 years, a couple of tragedies along the way. From that point of view, has there been anything over the past 14 years that's made you think twice about it, or has it just made you more determined?
You know, I was on my way to NASA to fly when the Challenger accident happened. And you know, given that I was an international astronaut, we were delayed 5 years. The program itself was delayed 2 years and 8 months, and I ended up flying 5 years later. It was a tremendous privilege to fly on that flight. And then Columbia happened in 2003, and again, we were delayed. And there's sort of a multi-part answer to this, and that is after Challenger, we made some tremendous improvements to the vehicle. We have some abort techniques that are much better now. The engines are much better. Our landing techniques are much better. We have better brakes. We have a parachute, drag chute that reduces the weight of the vehicle by half when it's rotating down to its nose wheel. And all those things after the first accident gave me a great deal of confidence about the safety of the vehicle. And then after the second accident, we had an issue that perhaps should not have happened. And I think we all have agreed to that since the accident. We have now minimized that issue, and foam is a known problem now. It's not fully understood, but it's a known problem. Foam will not bite us again, and I think that is something that's very important to say. One thing that our crew did over the last 4 years is about every 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, we would go down to the Cape and just talk with the people that touch the vehicle. And it's those people that when you talk to them, talk to the line managers and how they do their job and how dedicated they are and how good they are, gives you a tremendous amount of confidence about the risk that we're taking. And it really is because of those individuals that I personally can take the risk. Plus, when you think about what we're trying to do, as Brent alluded to earlier, perhaps the biggest thing that we may achieve is that we're showing the world that we can work together. Canada, Russia, United States, Japan, 14 countries from Europe, and there's a few other countries in there as well. We wake up every day and we're excited about what we do and we're dedicated to where we're going, and that may be our best legacy, at least I hope.
We'll return now to Houston and start with Nancy.
Hi, Nancy Holland from KHOU. Well, I hate to see anybody not put on the spot, so I'll ask Heidi a question. This morning we heard about the spacewalk, and it was called choreography and complex. Can you tell me, as you trained, what was the biggest challenge for you, and if at any moment you felt sort of stressed or pressured, what you did to kind of equalize your head and get back at it?
Well, that's definitely a good question, because the spacewalks are very complex, and they like to call it the choreography because it does require a significant amount of choreography to get everything done that needs to be done, because you have a certain amount of time to do it. I'd have to say the hardest things about the spacewalk is probably in the training, and it's the physical aspect. The spacewalks themselves are 6.5 hours. And we train in the pool for 6 hours. So being in the pool underwater is the closest we can get to weightlessness, being neutrally buoyant. But unfortunately in the pool we still have gravity. And so as much as we try to offset it, you still have that factor. And it is very difficult. I get out of the pool and those are some of the best nights of sleep that I have because I'm just so tired. But, you know, after you do enough training, things do start to get easier, and having, you know, this team that I'm surrounded by, you know, going outside with, you know, even just going in the pool with Joe, you know, I keep joking that when I grow up I want to be just like Joe, and that's true. You know, I feel like the kid sister looking up to the big brother, and having the opportunity to go out with Joe is just tremendous, and you just gain so much experience watching him do something. And then having, you know, Dan and Steve inside, they're the ones doing the choreography because they have the script, and they have to keep me straight and tell me, no, you need to do this, this is what you got to do next, this is what comes next, so that the whole thing flows together. And that's what puts together a spacewalk.
Okay.
I got it for Heidi. When we start off, she was definitely stressed, breathing hard, working hard, tired at the end of the run, but doing a really good job keeping up on some really tough stuff. There's one tool she had that's called a torque multiplier, and we've got a much lighter weight one now, but the one she was messing with at first weighed a ton, and she's laying on her side trying to manhandle this thing, and just really we've been doing a good job but working hard. 4 years later, she is, in my opinion, one of the best that we have, flown or unflown. I'd stack her against anybody, and you will see her again.
Kate Tobin with CNN for Joe. Learned a new word today. I believe it's stiction. Could you explain what that means and the backstory with the station solar arrays, and looking forward how that comes into play with your assembly and deployment of the arrays on 115?
What was the second part of that question?
The backstory, what happened, I believe, on the 97 mission.
Oh, okay. Stiction is a phenomenon, and it is a chemical interaction, atomic oxygen blocking material that they put on not all but some of the panels. There are about 11 or so sites. Well, no, actually it ends up being a collection of 11 so sites that the arrays can stick together. That's why we go out halfway, because that deploys all of the panels that don't have this coating. And then you can cook all of the panels that do have this coating, because they've proven through testing that heat, which you can get from the sun, will reduce that bond. Then we'll continue to deploy. And that's enough strength, enough tension to break this bond, and the stiction will release. Of course, the last panel that releases, and we don't know which one of those pairs it will be the one that was stuck the hardest. That's what happened on 97. We did not expect that to happen on 97. The first set of arrays we deployed at too low of a tension. Pull is about 13 pounds worth of pull in low tension mode versus 75 pounds of pull in the high tension mode. It was clear right off the bat that the panels were stronger than the tension mechanism was, and so you saw the tension reel come off the V-guides. We are trained now. The procedure has been worked for several years by a team of experts to keep that from happening, and we are spring-loaded to stop. We put Heidi on the button because it's a proven fact that women have faster reaction times, and so if anybody says abort, she will abort the deploy, and then we go into our procedures to remove the stiction, which ultimately is EVA, but we don't expect it to go that far.
We have time for one more question. Mark.
Mark Carreau, Houston Chronicle. I wonder if one or two of the spacewalkers would talk about how important it is to be in good physical shape to do the kind of work you have to do. Yeah, Dan, it'd be great. And what you do to get
and work out.
And what you do to get into that shape.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly not alone in that. I think we all spend a lot of time. I think the EVAs in the pool, like Heidi mentioned, practicing those in the neutral buoyancy lab, that's a lot harder than we expect, and then the experienced crew members tell us, we'll see during, the real day. As far as, physically hard, it is very demanding. The tools can't be, can't be weightless, can't be neutrally buoyant, and still without being too bulky to work with. So what we end up doing is we spend a lot of time with weight training, and a lot of time working the cardiovascular end just to get our endurance up. Again, it's mostly geared towards working in the pool, but still there's some things you want to make sure your strength's up on orbit. The time that we spend on orbit, there's some reduction in your cardiovascular capability. It happens, in just a matter of a few days, and you try to exercise if you're not too busy, as we're going to tend to be, I think. But you want to be at the top of your game before you go into quarantine, and kind of maintain that and launch, and hopefully feel as fit as you can be, and prevent injuries. The other thing too, I think that all the training kind of prevents injuries on the ground. Now, with that said, I suffered a bit of an injury about a year ago too, and actually tore a bicep tendon and got that squared away. Luckily in plenty of time to do this, but yeah, we all spent a lot of time in the gym and spent a lot of time running, and our experience, I think, with other folks that have done this is that's the right thing to do to get ready.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome to the STS-115 Post-Flight Readiness Review Press Conference. I'm Dean Acosta. Joining me to my left is NASA Administrator Michael Griffin. To his left, Space Operations Associate Administrator Bill Gerstenmaier. To his left is Space Shuttle Program Manager Wayne Hale. And to his left, Launch Director Mike Leinbach. We'll have some short opening remarks, and then we'll go to your questions. Please, I ask to identify yourself and identify who your question is for. And please, if you can, turn off your Blackberries and phones now so we don't have that disruption. Not you, Mike, you're all right. Okay, with that, I turn to the Administrator for some opening remarks.
Well, thanks, Dean. As I always say, it is a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to work with this team. And a thrill to see another flight readiness review. This was another great review. I was talking to Dean afterward, and he was saying, boy, now that I sit in these things, I'm getting more insight to how you engineers work, and I still can't understand it. And that's good. We still have a few secrets up our sleeves. So this was a great review, and I'm looking forward to moving toward a great launch.
Thanks, Mike. Again, I'd like to echo, it was a great review, and in my mind, a great review means we had a lot of good discussion, and we just had a tremendous amount of discussion from all the folks involved on a variety of topics. We covered many things. If you ask me to step back and give you kind of the general impression of the FRR, I think the major things I would pick up that I learned from the FRR was that the challenge of the International Space Station assembly is really huge. If you look at what we're going to do in terms of EVAs and the timelines and the activity associated with that assembly, it is a very, very busy timeline with many, many challenging things in it, and it really impressed me with how much the teams have prepared for this. They've spent many hours of many backup procedures, many contingency situations they're prepared for. They've worked extremely well with the shuttle team, looking at capabilities of the shuttle and how they can maximize use of the shuttle, and we're prepared. So it may not go exactly the way it's all scripted. The solar array deploy will be interesting, but if it doesn't, I think the teams are as prepared as any team I've ever seen to get prepared. So that was one takeaway I had from the meeting. I think the other thing that I kind of went into the FRR was this is a fairly quick turnaround from the last FRR to this FRR, and I was concerned that maybe we wouldn't have enough time to really review the subjects in detail and do the analysis that was needed to be there. The teams did just a tremendous job of being prepared. One metric you can look at is just how long the discussion goes. The discussion went fairly long, and we had actually probably slightly more charts at this FRR than we did in the last FRR. So that says the teams had enough time to get their data done, to get the analysis done, and bring it forward. We're not carrying very many exceptions or open work out of here. There's a few that Wayne will talk to you about a little bit, but there are not many considering where we are. So I think, again, we had about the right amount of time we're there. One thing that was also encouraging is some of the NOAC samples have been returned and checked out in the ArcJet. That's impressive that those have come back from space from the last flight. They've been essentially conditioned in thermal chambers down here on the ground and then tested, and it looks like there's some viable potential repair techniques there. So again, the teams have done a tremendous job of pulling that together. So those are my two impressions. One, the complexity of the challenge of assembly, and then the second one is the fact that we're really prepared to go do this flight. The other things we've done is we set the launch date again for the 27th, and I think it's around 4:30. on the 27th, so we're ready to go for that. We still carry some open work that needs to be looked at. We have a KU band bolt issue that Wayne's going to talk about with his team at the PRCB tomorrow. We laid out some general guidance for them to go into that review tomorrow, but they'll do that at the PRCB. And then APU number 3, we need to do a little bit of work there to understand the failure we had on the last flight. But those are probably the two major things that sit out there that are open. We did discuss foam like we always do. We did the poll. All members of the board were go for the launch. There were no-go positions. There were 2 dissenting opinions, one from the Johnson Space Center and one from the Marshall Space Flight Center. Their opinion was they would like to have the ice frost ramps redesigned as soon as possible, and they made that comment to us. Chris and Brian were both go. Brian's rationale for go, which you'll see on the statements which we'll release to you, is essentially that we had this discussion at the last FRR. The rationale still holds. He didn't see anything in this flight that negated any of the rationale for flight that we put together for the last FRR, so Brian didn't see any need to be no-go at this point, but he did want to recognize that the same kind of rationale that went into the previous launch decision still holds in his mind. And so again, we were all essentially go with those couple comments, and again, I think we had a very, very good discussion about all the aspects of how people felt, what engineering needed to be done, and what was missing. So it was just an outstanding review, and we're really ready to go fly.
Wayne? Well, let's see. I think we may have missed a trick by not having Mike Seferdini here to talk about all the space station assembly work that's going to go forward, because as Bill Gerstenmaier said, this is probably the most complicated assembly sequence that has been undertaken, and it will the record will not last, because the next flight will be more complicated than this one. So it is a real challenge to the teams to execute the on-orbit timeline. We talked a little bit about that about a week ago when we had the press conference down in Houston. Talking about the FRR and the shuttle in particular, I did want to point out that this was a bit of a challenge for the team. After having a long period where we had significant time between flights to analyze problems, do lots and lots of testing, run lots and lots of analysis, and have, I don't want to say leisurely, but let's say extended engineering reviews and meetings, we needed to turn around from a flight in about 5.5 weeks. The problems that we had on the last flight, while they weren't major, there were also some non-trivial problems that had to be resolved. We have got almost all of those resolved. We have a couple that are open. Most notably, we have a couple of thermostats and a heater line on APU number 3 that we're still troubleshooting on Discovery to try to understand why they didn't work exactly right. We'd like to not go into a flight and have problems with our heaters on those fuel lines. Right now, we think that Atlantis is tested out just fine, so whatever problem there is on Discovery is likely not there on Atlantis, but you'd like to have a full resolution rather than going in with troubleshooting still in work, so we're going to talk about that at the L-2. We have a handful of issues like that that are still requiring some minor cleanup. Probably the longest thing that we talked about today wasn't the foam. We did have a long discussion about the foam on the external tank. And while I'm talking about that, I should point out that what we saw on 121, STS-115, the last flight, is about what we expected. It was about an average foam loss kind of a tank, which is to say we avoided the big pieces. We avoided anything that was what we would call unexpected, but we had a number of foam releases. We know we have future work to do. What we want to see on STS-115 is as good or better performance. And we do have a team in work that is working very hard to pull together a new design on those famous ice frost ramps to eliminate that hazard from us starting with tanks that will be flying next year. But the longest discussion we had today was about the famous bolts that we found on the KU band antennas. Now, this is a real success story. Steve Polis, the manager of the Orbiter project, reminds me every time we talk about it, this is an example of improving safety on board the space shuttle. Some 25 or 30 years ago, a mistake was made in the design of this particular component, the way this antenna is bolted onto the orbiter. And for the last 25 or more years, we have been flying with these threaded fasteners, bolts, that just barely have a thread or two engaged into the nut that holds them on. That is not good engineering practice. We had some questions about threaded fasteners and went back through an exhaustive review, which is still ongoing, of all the threaded fasteners on board the orbiter in particular, and we found that in this particular application that bolts weren't long enough and had been that way for a number of flights. That is not where we want to be. So on Discovery and Endeavour, the two orbiters that we have in the maintenance facility, we immediately went to those vehicles and changed those bolts out. That problem is resolved. On Atlantis, unfortunately, the access is very difficult. So we are doing some more work to try to understand exactly how much risk is involved with either changing those bolts out, because anytime you go to do non-standard work at the launch pad, and this is in a particularly difficult location, you run some risk, or B, what is the real risk for this particular flight? Then could we accept this less than perfect application of a screw thread fastener for one more flight? So that work is ongoing. We will be having discussions on a daily basis through the weekend probably. I think it's likely we will change those bolts out, but the analysis is still ongoing, and we want to make sure we don't sign up to do something and incur damage potentially from workmen being in there that we didn't have to. So that's why that's still under discussion. And because it is a story still in development and the engineering analysis on both sides is not complete, we had quite an interesting discussion this afternoon at the Flight Readiness Review, and we know that's open work that we want to resolve before we go launch Atlantis. That's kind of a normal day in the life of the space shuttle, those kind of discussions. And I expect they will go on for as long as we fly this vehicle, and it probably apply somewhat to future vehicles as well. So all in all, the team has worked very hard. We have got 17,000 people around the country working on the Space Shuttle program. They have really turned to. We're ready to go forward with the completion of a few last items, and on August 27th we'll hope to be back here and look at the skies and see if Mother Nature will cooperate with us for an on-time launch Sunday afternoon.
Okay, thanks. On the processing side, out of the launch pad, processing is going pretty well. We've had our share of challenges with our hypergolic loading, but I can tell you, on behalf of Team Atlantis, they are extremely happy to be at the launch pad and to have a launch date set now by the agency. You'll recall that Atlantis has been mated twice before, and we've had to demate her. And so the whole team, not just here at Kennedy Space Center, but across the country that works on Atlantis for a living, they're really feeling good right now. Atlantis is at the pad a couple of weeks away from launch, 10 days away or so from launch, so they're really feeling good. We've got about 2 days of contingency left in the schedule at the launch pad, so that's enough for us at this stage. Meanwhile, back in the orbiter processing facility, Discovery is going through the first turnaround processing flow since the accident. She's about 1 month into about a 3-month turnaround process, and everything is going really well there. So from a launch on need perspective, if that should become necessary right now, Discovery is looking good for a rescue mission if that becomes necessary. So from the Kennedy Space Center perspective, we're glad to have a launch date, and we're looking forward to it, and Team Atlantis is feeling really good right now.
All right, thanks, Mike. That concludes opening remarks, and we now will start with questions. We'll start right up front with Jay.
Wayne, I have a two-parter. First of all, just how many people vote? How many votes are there in an FRR? And secondly, what would happen if the UHF antenna 1 or 2 volts gave way in orbit? I know you have to bring it back inside, but what would be the problems you'd have to deal with?
Let's see, voting members for the Flight Readiness Board, well, that's Bill Gerstenmeyer's board, but what are there? There's less than a dozen. I'm trying to count in my head. We can certainly give you the exact number. Voting members, the 4 human spaceflight center directors, the space station program manager, the shuttle program manager, contractors.
There's probably slightly more than 12.
I'm sorry, you're right. I'm thinking I'm adding it up. I shouldn't do this in real time. We'll get you the list.
We'll get you. We're going to actually post on the web the same forms we did last time with the various signatures of all the board members, so you'll get a chance to see that, and you can count them up for yourself.
Now, in terms of the KU band antenna, the issue is what happens at launch. The most vibration environment occurs right at the time that the vehicle lifts off, and so that would be the time, if it were going to come loose, that we'd be worried about it. And of course, we want to prevent that from happening either by ensuring ourselves that we have a good positive engineering margin on the structure as it exists, or by changing out the bolts and making sure we have good engagement on all the threaded fasteners. So one way or the other, we're not going to have a problem on that antenna.
Well, are you saying that you don't think it would be a problem once that you deploy the KU band antenna?
This is a problem that occurs at or near launch time, not on orbit. So obviously, if it came off at launch time, you wouldn't have it available on orbit. We would really like to have the function of that, but the concern is what happens if it falls off and causes damage during the launch phase.
All right, next question. So Mike.
I'm Mike Schneider, Associated Press. My question is either for Dr. Griffin or Mr. Gerstenmaier. I guess the two dissenters, were they the directors of Johnson and Marshall? And I assume they hadn't dissented at the last flight readiness review meeting. Did they explain, if that's the case, did they explain why their decisions had changed?
Let me clarify.
Okay.
They were go for the launch, but they recognized from the folks that they represent that within the organization they represent, they had some folks that wanted to make sure that we knew that they wanted to change the ice frost ramps, and that's exactly what they did at the last FRR. So all they did was they took the chance to express to the board their desire to change the ice frost ramps as soon as we could change the ice frost ramps.
Sign off on the certification.
And they signed off on the certification and their go. So it's almost a nuance in a way, but they wanted us to know that there were folks within their organization that wanted us to know that we needed to make sure that the ice frost ramps got redesigned as soon as possible, and that's what they told us. And so that was their opinion that they added in, and so that's what we've recognized. And we all agree with that, and as Wayne described, we have a team off looking at redesigning the ice frost ramp.
And nobody was really disagreeing.
We all agree with that, and I just said that for completeness because they, as part of their statement, they said go, but we would like to tell you we want you to change the ice frost ramps as soon as we can. And we're planning on doing that, not on the next tank, the next 116, but on the flight after that, we expect it.
That everyone understands. I mean, could you say this was unanimous?
We were go, okay. Yes. The board's position was unanimous, and we did not have to appeal above the board.
Correct. All right, let's go over there against the wall, Mike.
Mike Cabbage with the Orlando Sentinel, I guess again for Bill. If you could explain a bit more about the decision of Mr. O'Connor and Mr. Scalise. It appears to me that, all the factors remain pretty much the same going into this launch as far as the ice frost ramps are concerned as they did the other one. What was it that changed their mind? What's the difference there? And also, were there any notations on the COFR this time, similar to the ones that they wrote last time?
I think you'll see on the form that Brian wrote his statement on an exception form, which is attached to the COFR, which we'll provide to you. And it basically says the rationale was the same. And he understood our decision before to go fly, and he understands our decision this time, and he sees no need to go fly. And Brian also stated in the review, and the teams agree, that the performance on STS-121 was, there was nothing in the performance of the tank that cast any doubt on any of our rationale that we used before for STS-121. The performance was as expected, as Wayne described. I think we need to be careful sometimes that folks think it was better performance in some sense, that we had less instances of foam loss, but we had two fairly large mass losses. So that averages out, and that says that's about average tank performance. So I caution us all as we look at this next tank that if we lose more foam, it's not that something has changed and we're dramatically worse. That's just typical tank performance. There's a lot of variation from tank to tank. Essentially, these ice frost ramps were sprayed on maybe 3-4 years ago. They're still the same basic ice frost ramp design as before, so the performance could be as we saw on STS-114, as we saw on 121. We'll see what we get on this next one, but we're gaining data. The other thing that I think the board recognized was we did gain some key data from STS-121. You know, we understand the time of release of the foam. We also understand how it comes off. And that's key data in starting to put together a theory on the delamination phenomena, which I think is really good. We probably need some more flights to really nail that theory down, but it's really important data. The other thing we had was we had some non-destructive evaluation where we did some X-ray and terahertz investigation of the ice frost ramps, where we could see some divots or some, I guess divots, some pockets of air inside the foam. Those did not liberate. So we didn't see any correlation between our non-destructive evaluation and the performance we saw in the tank. And so then that's curious to us. So again, this flight did exactly what it was supposed to do. It gave us some key data that's helping us get smarter and will ultimately help us make a better redesign of the ice frost ramp.
All right, let's stay right there, second row, Bill.
Bill Harvey, CBS, with two questions. One for Mike Leinbach. Can you maybe give us some sense if they do approve the bolt change-out, what's required to do it and how much time it takes and how that plays into your 2 days of contingency? I guess, and the bottom line is, can you make the 27th if you have to go do the work? And for Wayne, we talked last week in Houston. I asked you about tanks and delivery schedules next year and possible slips in that schedule, and you didn't want to tell me anything last week. Can you tell me anything this week about where that stuff stands?
We're still working on it. That's my short answer. I haven't really had a formal review with Think people since we talked, was that a week ago? Less than a week ago. And we do know that we've got a number of facility modifications that we want to make to the factory at Michoud that will help improve tank production. You know, one of the big problems is that big old factory down there is not air conditioned. And we put restrictions on when we can spray foam in terms of temperature and humidity. And if we can go into the areas where they do these critical foam sprays and provide air conditioning, environmental control, we can actually allow ourselves to spray more of the time than we can now. Right now in New Orleans, as you might imagine, it's difficult to find the right times when the humidity and temperature don't exceed some of our limits. So we are making some investments down there in improving that facility, some additional fixtures and so on and so forth. But a really large part of the review is going in to look at all the steps that we did coming out of the Columbia accident. Say, okay, we really pushed the pendulum all the way to the end. We really are making sure this is absolutely done right in every area of the tank. Are there some areas of the tank, say on the side away from the orbiter, where maybe we don't have to go through all these steps, and if the foam comes off over there, it's not transported toward the orbiter, and that would allow us not to take some of these time-consuming super cautious steps that we do with foam, and those sorts of questions are under review, and the tank folks are going to report back to me probably in about 3 weeks on their progress. Right now we are challenged on a tank for, well, a spring tank next year. We have had quite a few discussions about the tank for the flight that's currently scheduled in February. That'll be the tank with the first ice frost ramp modifications, we believe. That one pretty much looks like it's coming in when we need it. But it's the tanks after that that we are going to have to make some improvements in the production rate to not have a problem. So that's still very much in play. That was not the short answer. That was the long answer. Okay. Now,
okay,
your part.
Well, now you can't say you didn't give him an answer.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, to the bolt access and change-out question, Bill. We're going to be studying access over the next couple of days in parallel with the engineering team continuing to refine their analysis. And we're going to do that because of the pad flow for the next 2 days. We still have to finish our hypergolic loading tonight. We'll get into that around midnight tonight for the FRCS oxidizer side. After that's done, we'll get into our ordnance operation Friday morning. And so the pad will be consumed with those two activities until Friday afternoon. So Friday afternoon is as soon as we can get in there, open the payload bay doors, and actually start putting in access if the decision is to go after these bolts. And so again, that allows us to refine our access study. We've done some CAD modeling of access, and that's really good. But until you get the technicians out there and you build the scaffolding and the pick boards and get a technician up there right next to the KU band antenna to look at the nuances of this ship versus the CAD drawing, obviously, we won't know fully what is required until we get in there. Again, that picks up Friday afternoon. Probably by early Saturday morning, midday Saturday, we'd be able to tell Wayne if we think we can execute this plan, if the bolt changeout does become required. The program has told us very clearly that if we get into a situation at the launch pad that the technicians are uncomfortable proceeding on, i.e. we're about to do more collateral damage than is worth the bolt changeout in the vertical, then we are to stand down, and that's exactly what we'll do. So we typically go into this with a dedicated team. We've already identified the techs to do this job. They were the ones that went over and looked at the bolts and changed the bolts out on 103 and 105. So they've already performed that task. So we have the best folks possible doing the job, and the plan right now looks doable. We would open the doors Friday afternoon and start erecting the scaffolding. The way we do that is there's a platform inside the payload changeout room. It's called the Clean Access Platform, and essentially rides up and down the payload ground handling mechanism to gain access to all areas of the payload bay. For cleaning purposes, it's the Clean Access Platform. It's a relatively thin platform, but it can extend out quite a ways, all the way to the keel area of the payload bay itself. So we would use that platform, insert that platform between the top of the payload and the hatch itself, the airlock hatch itself, and then build the scaffolding up off of that to get to the KU band in the upper right-hand corner of the payload bay. So it all looks good on paper, in the CAD modeling. And once we get into the job, if we get scared by something and we shouldn't proceed on, we're going to stand down and recommend that we don't do that change out in the vertical. So that would be sometime Saturday, Sunday. That would use up, Sunday is one day of contingency, so that would use up that day. And then we're carrying one more day mid-next week, right prior to launch countdown, for any other things that may come up. So it's not a long job. It's probably 2 days total to do this. And out of those 2 days, probably 44 hours of the 48 is the access, installation, and removal. The bolt changeout itself is probably going to be very straightforward, assuming we don't get into any gotchas when we get out there.
All right, let's go stay on that row with Irene.
With Reuters for Wayne, a couple of bolt questions. Given the processing schedule, are you expecting that a decision about whether to proceed with this will be made tomorrow? And if so, would the strategy include the options of what you would do if technically it becomes difficult? At that point, would you be able to say, well, we're okay to fly as is if we can't do the bolt change out, but we'd rather try and do it? Or if you make a decision that you want to change out the bolts, are we talking scrub and return to the OPF if they can't be changed out? And then if you could just describe a little bit about, I think you said there was like 1 or 2 threads left. How many should it be? I guess maybe just in terms of the length or diameter, or some way to couch the size of the bolt. And thanks.
Okay, well, let me start with the easy one. I think in this particular application, I'd like a minimum of 6 and preferably 8 plus screw threads engaged. And we pulled one of the bolts off in Endeavor, and it had 2/3 of a screw thread engaged. And some of the other orbiter bolts had 1.5 screw threads engaged. So, you know, what we've got here is we don't really have as many screw threads engaged as you'd like to have. Now there are 4 bolts, and we're talking about the aft 2, the forward 2 are in good shape. Part of the analysis that the engineers are going to run is, will the antenna stay safely on if we have nothing contributing from the 2 screws that don't have enough threads engaged, and it's all carried by the 2 that are properly bolted in. So we have all that engineering analysis ahead of us, and rather than speculate on all the possible permutations and combinations of what might happen, we want to let the engineers go off and do their work, come back with their analysis. We want to let the CAPE folks here go off and look at the access And then we can make an informed decision, and we'll make what I trust will be a well-discussed and widely talked about decision, and I expect it'll probably be more like Saturday than tomorrow, because frankly we need to give the engineers a couple of days to do their work, and we don't get access in the area until late Friday, early Saturday. So tomorrow is not decision day.
If you were able to change out Discovery and Endeavors, how did Atlantis' get skipped?
Well, this was just found. I mean, the joke that I had, and it's not really very funny, is I wish we'd found this 3 weeks earlier when Atlantis was still in the orbiter processing facility when you have good access. The reason that Discovery and Endeavors are changed is they're in the orbiter processing facility and they have excellent access, and that's where they normally do this kind of work. The problem that we have now is Atlantis, we just found this problem, Atlantis is in the vertical on the launch pad, and we just don't have very good access. And if we'd found it 3 weeks later, of course, we would have flown, and probably everything would have been okay. I mean, we've flown 26 times, and everything's been okay. So there is a school of thought that says it's probably okay to fly one more time. But I'd rather have good engineering rationale demonstrating that it is acceptable. So that's what the folks are off generating. If they do find out we can really live almost literally without these two bolts engaged, then we won't go to the bother of changing them out. I'm not sure did great justice. You understand the payload changeout room is 6 stories high. The guys are operating up at the top of this. So imagine operating on a surfboard that's tied down at one end, sticking out over a 6-story balcony. I mean, you know, this has got all kinds of implications that you just really would rather not do because of the location and access. And if we have to do it, it will be done safely and it will be done properly. But if you don't have to do it, that would just be great too. So we're going to see how the analysis comes out over the next couple of days and then make a decision when we have all the information in front of us.
All right, good description there. We're going to go to Todd, and then we have a couple of journalists standing by in Washington, D.C. and in Houston. We'll go to them next, but we'll start off with Todd.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today with one for Wayne and one for, I guess, 2 for Wayne. You've described the amount of foam loss on the 121 mission as average, and I think some people might interpret that as no improvement since the Columbia accident, and I don't think you think that's the case. Could you characterize what improvement you think you guys have gained? And also, I'm wondering what you've determined since 121 on the APU signature failure that you saw, whether you've been able to nail down what actually happened, and if not, how do you exonerate that APU issue before L-2?
See, there were 2 APU issues. There was the heater thermostat issue that I was talking about earlier, which is still in troubleshooting, although every indication is that Atlantis is okay, and there may have been some electrical fault on due to workmanship or aging parts or something on Discovery. That's what's still in work. The other APU problem that we probably talked about a lot more both in the MMT and at the press conferences was the potential of a leak from APU number 1. We have run that to ground. We now believe that there was what they call a quick disconnect cover on the gaseous nitrogen side that had a very small Teflon seal that was deformed, and that probably was the source of that very, very slow leak, although folks are off doing the final test to wrap that up. So we had a couple of issues. Let's go back and talk about the tank for a minute. When we historically look at all the photography that's been taken after external tank separation, we only have about half of the tanks that we can look at. The other half, either the cameras didn't work, or we were in darkness, or other things prevented us from getting good imagery. But of the tanks that we saw, about half that we have good imagery of, we have now meticulously gone back and looked at those photographs and done a count of all the areas of foam loss. And you can see that show up quite well because foam loss looks white against the orange kind of basic of the tank. And the folks in the 3 imagery labs that we have around the country have really done a huge amount of work to plot up statistics. My goodness, we have statistics on foam loss. Statistics on how big, where they were, how many on every flight, were they associated with the ice frost ramps, were they associated with other things. And so we have a huge number of statistics. And when I talk about an average foam loss, I mean number of areas that we see that foam came off the tank. We have an average number. What we have avoided is the large mass releases. And so the improvements that we made is, okay, we eliminated the bipod ramp, which was the cause of the 107 accident. It's a piece of foam that's no longer in the vehicle, so you cannot lose that in flight because it's not on the vehicle. The PAL ramp, we lost another large piece, pardon me, as you'll recall on STS-115 Eileen Collins flight, and we have eliminated that PAL ramp off all future tanks. And so again, foam that's not on the tank can't fall off in flight. We have improved our processes in an area where the external tank is really 2 tanks on top of each other, the hydrogen tank on the bottom, the oxygen tank on the top in an inner tank region, the structural region. And where that hydrogen tank meets the inner tank, there is a natural area where we have lost a number of pieces of foam off what we call the hydrogen intertank flange, where that meets up. We have done a number of changes to the way the foam is applied in that area, and we're not seeing any significant foam losses off that area. So yes, we have improved the situation. We've also made a number of improvements on areas where we have put manual, we call manual sprays on the vehicle. Now the area that we know is next on our list that we're working very hard to fix is the ice frost ramp, which poses the next level of hazard to us. And the biggest piece of foam that historically we have seen come off an ice frost ramp is about 0.085 pounds, less than 0.09 pounds. Statistically, we know we haven't seen what could happen, so we give ourselves what they call a 3 sigma analysis that says we could lose up to a quarter pound, 0.25 piece of foam, and then we did a risk analysis on that. And all the discussion you hear about is an acceptable risk or not an acceptable risk seems to center on that quarter pound piece of foam, which hypothetically could come off, which is, what, 3 times larger than we've ever seen come off from the ice frost ramps, which, by the way, is 1/4 or 1/8 the size of the large pieces of foam that really caused us concern before. So we've made improvements to the tank. We are releasing fewer numbers in a strict sense, but more importantly, the pieces that we're releasing are smaller. We have an average number of losses on 121 tank, and our goal is to avoid the big pieces, quite frankly, and we did on the last flight, and that's an improvement that we continue to carry on with in the future.
Did that answer all the questions? Todd? Good? All right, let's go to Washington, D.C. I think we have a couple reporters that are standing by. Please identify yourself and your organization and the question, who you're posing your question to, please.
Tracy Watson, USA Today for Wayne Hale. First, a clarification. When you talked about the boats that had only 2/3 of the thread or 1.5 threads engaged, was that on the KU antenna or was that somewhere else? I missed that.
I could just barely hear your question. The discussion of the bolt thread engagement, and I think that's the gist of your question. There are 4 bolts that hold this antenna onto the vehicle. 2 of them are very well engaged, and 2 of them are not. And the 2 that aren't, when we took those bolts off, the other 2 orbiters we saw as little as, say, 2/3 of a thread engaged and as much as 1.5 threads engaged. Neither one of those are good numbers. So we'd really like to have more engagement of a screw thread fastener. We'll get through machine design 101 before we're done with this press conference. But the engineers, as I said, are off doing the analysis to say, okay, well, if those 2 bolts that have the small number of threads engaged, were to provide no real attach function for us at all, say they would be removed, would the remaining 2 bolts hold us adequately? You know, in a lot of areas, we over-designed the structure of the vehicle because we designed really before we knew where it was going to fly in terms of structural vibrations and so forth. Now that we know more and we apply what we know, is it possible that we really don't need those extra 2 bolts? And that's part of the analysis that they're off working on. And I hope that answered your question, because it was really pretty hard to hear.
Yeah. You're better than me, Wayne. I thought it was Charlie Brown's teacher asking the question there. All right, Tracy, hopefully that covered it. Is there somebody else at headquarters?
I'm going to try again, although Wayne did answer my question. It's Tracy Watson again. If that antenna fell off, can you give me a sense of where it would go and how much damage it would do?
It would go down, and the damage would not be good. And, you know, that's about all I want to say about that. We don't want it to come off. That's not a good thing.
We're not going to fly if we think there's a possibility that the antenna could come off.
Right.
All right, next question from headquarters.
There are no more questions from headquarters.
All right. Let's go to Johnson Space Center. I think it's Mark.
Gina Sinceri, ABC News for Wayne. I'm a little baffled at how to characterize this no-go vote. That wasn't really a no-go vote. Was it just more a philosophical statement? What exactly was the intent on that, on the ice frost ramps from JSC and Marshall?
There was no no-go votes. The board's position was we are go for STS-115, and then we now give them the luxury of adding any other words that they want beyond go, which we did last time, and they, both Marshall and JSC, emphasized to us that they would like to have the ice frost ramps redesigned, and that's all they said. So essentially it was a unanimous decision by the board that we were go, and that's where we stand now. And then Brian referenced back to the previous flight readiness review and his discussion he had there, but again, ultimately he was go for flight.
All right, so to be clear, unanimous vote to go. There were no no-go votes. So in case, hopefully that didn't confuse anybody. All right, I think we have one more question from Johnson.
Mark Carruth from the Houston Chronicle. Thanks for that clarification. I have sort of an esoteric question for Wayne Hale on the antenna, and that is, if you've flown all these times on all the orbiters and the antenna never came off, or you didn't see any indication of less than a secure antenna, why is it now that you need to nail this down and not fly further with that condition?
Mark, you are a great candidate for program management, and I would tell you that that's exactly the question I've been asking. The real answer, and I'll be serious about it, is that when an engineer does a design that involves threaded fasteners, having that small number of threads engaged in the nut or bolt on the backside is just not good practice, and there are circumstances in which those threaded fasteners can come out. So that is a poor design or a poor application, and we need to rectify it. It's something that you really don't want to have just good engineering practice. I don't know, Mike, this is probably an opening for you. You want to help here with the engineering?
Sure. To pick up on what Wayne said, engineering is in part about process and in part about outcome. We embrace good process with the hope that that yields good outcome. This is a case where the process failed. It failed 25 years ago. So the question before us now is, can we fly anyway? Will there be a good outcome with the bolts we have in place? Obviously, Mark, your question is exactly on point. If the design is all that weak, how could you fly 60, 70 times on these 3 orbiters alone and not have something break? And of course, the analysts are now off busily assessing the answers to exactly that question. The follow-up question is, how strong is the attachment with the 2 bolts that are known to be good? and then whatever other help you might have from the other bolts. And they're off assessing that. When the original design was done, very conservative assumptions were made about the vibration loading that would be imparted to the high gain antenna from the shuttle, the acoustics generated by the shuttle main engines. The assumptions on the loading were very conservative. And now the guys have got to sharpen their pencils and go back and say, okay, well, what are the real loads? And we suspect that the real loads are somewhat less than the conservative design assumptions. So as Wayne, I think, or Bill Gerstenmaier characterized it earlier, the engineers have been given some homework assignments, and we will wait with bated breath to see how that turns out. In the meantime, the ground ops folks that Mike Leinbach heads up here will be worrying the issues of how you get access to the particular fasteners the most easily and with the least possibility of any collateral damage in case we need to do that. And I think if we say any more about that, we're going to be repeating ourselves.
I think you might be right. All right, we're going to come back here to Florida for just a couple more questions before we wrap up the press conference. Irene had her hand up first, so let's start there.
Maybe, Mike Griffin, if you could take this. I think we all understand that there were no-go votes, but you kind of characterized the last FRR with the two people who said that they had some objections to launch as we're all go for launch, but these people had a couple of issues with the ice frost ramps. So this is going to sound a little weird, but is this launch decision less contested? And I know you don't like that word, but than the 121 launch decision? Are people now just enjoying writing in the margins and stuff? Or it's a little confusing when you are explaining that people are expressing issues and opinions in these official documents and then saying, well, everybody's go for launch.
I get the question, and we ourselves actually have asked ourselves the question of whether our polling and our documentation process is as crisp as we would like it to be, and in fact we're working on it. Because although in the end a decision must be made by NASA management to launch or not launch, and that obviously is a binary decision, I personally have never been involved in any spacecraft project where one didn't have concerns or reservations about something. I mean, you decide to go, but by no means do we think it's a slam dunk, and I've made that quite clear on many occasions. So we're looking at our, what we call our COFR, our Certification of Flight Readiness, and the whole process that leads to that, to provide essentially the opportunity for people to note their concerns or reservations even while they say, yeah, I'm go for launch. I don't mind using the word contested. I didn't mind it that the STS-115 review was a contentious review. I think that's how we get truth out on the table. I would say that this review was less contentious, maybe not a lot less. I don't want them to be. But with regard to the ice frost ramp foam, it is only fair to note that the analysts have now had 2 more months to work those issues, and they had produced a more refined set of numbers, which were in fact better. So the numbers were both more refined. They are still quite conservative, but they were more refined, and they are better, which gave everyone good feeling. Also, we flew quite well last time. One flight is one flight, but it certainly goes in the right direction. The station is in excellent position for the CSCS, the crew survival on orbit option, while we wait for the shuttle to launch on need if we need it. And so again, I would remind you that what's at issue here is the programmatic risk of how we go about completing the station. And which is the greater risk for the program, a lengthy delay or a concern about possibly a foam strike on the orbiter? And that's a decision that we have answered in the way that we've answered it. But the point is, we don't feel we're risking crew, and no one in the room felt that we were risking crew. our decisions might be different if we thought we were risking crew, but we are not. And so the review was active, it was participatory. I was really proud of the team and proud to be working with these people. And in the end, everybody said, you know, let's go. People, as Gerst said earlier, want to get on record that although the answer is go, we really need to redesign these ice frost ramps. And as I said earlier, nobody disagrees. This is not an argument we're having. So now, have I answered that as fully and thoroughly as can be done?
Good explanation. Okay, a couple more before we wrap up. Let's go with Bill Harwood right there.
You had until the very last thing, which prompted this question: is it still technically red? Is it still in the probable category? Okay,
yeah.
Thanks. And for Mike, a sharp-eyed reader, I call this an unprecedented repair if you did it, and a reader sent me a note saying that he worked on the orbiter back in the 80s and 90s and that he recalled changing out an entire KU at the pad versus a rollback in the past. And I don't remember that, but is that true?
I remember that myself.
I don't remember that one, no. We've done some other unusual jobs at the launch pad, but I don't recall doing that particular job before.
All right, stay along the wall, Mike Cabbage.
Mike Cabbage, again for Wayne. Could you talk a bit about what some of your candidates are with the APU issue? Is that considered an unexplained anomaly right now, and if so, would you guys go ahead and fly with it like that?
Yeah, it is considered an unexplained anomaly, UA, as it gets in NASA parlance, and that's one of the things that we really like to avoid, if at all possible. What we're doing, you know, the first anomaly that we really try to resolve with the APUs was this potential of a leak on APU-1, because that has somewhat more serious consequences. So we spent quite a bit of time troubleshooting this leak on APU-1, and because that involves hazardous or toxic chemicals, the hydrazine, and there it's right next to the other APU, I mean, it's a serial operation to do troubleshooting. So we actually came to troubleshoot the thermostat problem later, and the sequential nature of that troubleshooting has put us a little bit further behind. We have an indication that perhaps one of the wires has been damaged, potentially due to some work that was done in the turnaround flow between flights. So we would like to get in there and understand that a little bit better. There are a number of potential causes we would like to rule out, things like our thermostats just getting old and failing. That would not be a good thing. We would also like to make sure that if it was a collateral damage or workmanship issue on discovery, that we don't have that same kind of problem on Atlantis. So those are the kinds of areas where we are continuing to do work. It is not unprecedented, and as a matter of fact, it's quite usual for us to launch with some unexplained anomalies. The consequences of this unexplained anomaly, if you had the same thing happen on the next flight, by the way, we were able to muddle through that situation on the last flight. Given exactly the same circumstances, we would be perfectly fine through the next flight. It would take something worse to get us into trouble, and at that point, the worst thing that could happen to you is you would have one hydraulic system not available for entry, which is certainly undesirable, but we have redundancy in the system, and that provides us a fully certified entry capability. So, well, I'd like to see this driven as far as we can before launch. It is possible that we could launch with an unexplained anomaly and wrap up after Atlantis is off the pad.
All right, we have time for one more question, and we'll wrap up the press conference. Let's go with Mike.
Mike Schneider, Associated Press. Question for Wayne. You said you're still doing a review of the bolt issue. I was wondering if you expected that it could show up on any other hardware on Atlantis.
Oh, really good question, Mike. You know, we're still going through all the threaded fasteners on board the orbiter. We have a number, as you know, there are a lot. So, you know, there could be another one found, and we've given quite a bit of thought to should we continue to do this? Well, yes, we should continue this, because if there are deficiencies, we'd rather find them and deal with them than be ignorant and have an accident caused out of ignorance. So we want to keep on improving our safety record. I guess the real story I would tell you about the bolts is I was reminded today that the aerodynamicists have conclusively proven that bumblebees can't fly. Now, Now, we all know that they can, so what does that mean? It means that the analysis is not accurate. So going back maybe to the question Mark Carreau said, we kept these bolts on for many, many flights. Does that mean it's unsafe? Well, probably what it means is that our analysis is lacking somewhere, so that's why we've sent the engineers off to do their homework.
All right, that'll be the last word. We'll wrap up today's press conference.